My name's Brandon and this is Nickelodeon Video Game History, a show where I take a look back on all of the video games based on Nickelodeon shows and retrospectively review them. Now, there's nothing wrong with being inspired by Nintendo. They've been around for so long for a reason, they're good at what they do, and they've pioneered so many different genres. Heck, you only need to look at the past 5 years to see them create a brand new genre. Breath of the Wild is basically its own style of game now. Naturally, when other companies outside of the video game space are keen to turn their properties into crossover games, they look to the big N for inspiration. Most recently, you've got Warner Bros. And Nickelodeon themselves using Smash as the inspiration for their respective platform fighters, and then there are plenty of cases where companies have tried to copy the Mario Kart and party and sports titles to varying degrees of success. Doing this is easier than making something completely original. The framework has already been laid, so theoretically, all the chosen developer has to do is copy what Nintendo has made as closely as possible. What's much rarer is what I call going the Kingdom Hearts route, striking out to do your own thing and bringing an original crossover story with it too. Now obviously Kingdom Hearts stands on the shoulders of Final Fantasy, but my point is Disney didn't just slap together a generic party game. Impressively though, Nickelodeon were very keen to cross over their franchises in unique ways in the 2000s. In fact, this was their preferred method of crossover until recently. Enter Nicktoons Freeze Frame Frenzy, a completely unique idea that would spawn 4 more games of a similar manner, or if you count the unique versions made for home consoles and the 2 Nintendo handhelds, they actually put out 11 of these Nicktoons games. Released on September 20, 2004 exclusively for the GBA, I don't think Nick had a clue how iconic this string of games would become for a generation of kids. Fun fact, this game was actually called SpongeBob SquarePants and Friends in Freeze Frame Frenzy for PAL regions. This kind of renaming was a regular occurrence between the 2 regions at the time. It's likely some sort of data showed that the Nicktoons name was far less iconic than SpongeBob in these regions. And this sort of brings me to my next point. Despite being the originator of this type of Nicktoons crossover, Freeze Frame Frenzy isn't really considered to be part of the Unite series. I think a lot of it comes down to Unite not being in the name, but take a look at the PAL names for the Unite series. All of them have the SpongeBob and Friends title followed by the game's subtitle. Hell, the final game in the series was just called SpongeBob SquarePants featuring Nicktoons Globs of Doom Worldwide. I just find it weird to not include Freeze Frame Frenzy too. To help Nickelodeon take this new step was Altron. They've popped up on the channel a handful of times now and they still have a bunch of Nick games to come. Honestly, they've been one of the better and more consistent developers I've covered in Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon video game history. You could have much worse teams in charge here. They specialised in handheld games, and as I said, Freeze Frame Frenzy was a GBA exclusive, which I think actually contributes to why so many people overlook this game. But what if I told you it was never supposed to be a handheld only title? Not too long ago, a home console version was dug up. A user of the website Hidden Palace had obtained a build of the game from March 25, 2004, and dumped the thing in its entirety. Nicktoons Snapshot has a slightly different name, but certainly took inspiration from the same areas as Freeze Frame Frenzy. It was being worked on by a team at Warthog Games, most famous for the, at the time, next-gen versions of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. There isn't a whole lot of info out there for Snapshot, but if you do some digging, you can find nuggets here and there. One of the only mentions of it was on an old Nickelodeon site called Communication that once housed backgrounds, episodes, news and clips for various Nickelodeon shows. The reason behind its cancellation is currently unknown. Maybe I'll put together a documentary on it if I ever manage to finish my Cat Dog Saving Mean Bob documentary. That shit's a lot of work. Freeze Frame Frenzy wasn't met with praise or celebration from critics at the time. It had a disturbingly low 5.3 review average, with its highest score being a 6.7. No doubt being one of the worst reviewed Nickelodeon games of all time has contributed to it being mostly forgotten by Nick fans. As long as it's not worse than Nickelodeon Party Blast, I'll be happy. The multiverse has gone haywire and characters from different universes are mysteriously converging. Am I describing the plot of Nicktoons Freeze Frame Frenzy or Spider-Man No Way Home? Story rarely plays a big part in GBA games, so that small description is almost everything you need to know here. Emphasis is squarely on the gameplay. On Wikipedia, Freeze Frame Frenzy is likened to Gekibo Gekisha Boy, and the resemblance is seriously uncanny. This was a Japanese exclusive game, so it may seem weird for this Nickelodeon game to lift its gameplay from a source like this, but Altron was a Japanese developer, so it makes sense. Essentially what we have here is lo-fi Pokemon Snap. Gameplay is dedicated to taking photos.
I am a photographer, and I took this photo. That's it, thank you.
The photos you take will rack up points, and reaching a required high score is needed to progress to a new area. Just like Pokemon Snap and Gekibo, the entire experience is on rails. Assuming the role of Professor Oak in this game is Jimmy Neutron, quite a fitting replacement. Because this is a Nick crossover game, you get to choose between different characters to snap photos. At the start, you only have a couple of options, but as you progress, the game drip feeds the rest of the roster. Altron attempts to make these choices meaningful. Usually you just pick your favorite character, but in Freeze Frame Frenzy, there are stats unique to every character. Jump power, walking speed, running speed, endurance, and flash gauge charging speed are the things that will set your characters apart from one another. At least in theory. In my experience, literally none of this matters. I'll dissect each stat one by one. Okay, jump power. This is completely meaningless. The ability to jump didn't come into play for me a single time. Walking speed and running speed never felt relevant as the game is on rails. Even if you run, you're bound to how fast the screen is scrolling, so you don't get moments like in the Pokemon Snap games, where you can speed up your vehicle and catch unique special moments you'd otherwise miss. Endurance does matter because this is a fancy way of referring to your health, but I can't say I ever died in a regular level here. I guess if you're a kid playing this game, it may have played a more prominent role. And then finally, you have your flash gauge charging speed. Like the health, this technically matters as it determines how quickly this meter will fill. Only issue is I have no clue what the point of this meter was. The only possible use I discovered was that using it would freeze these little enemies in place. Cool, I guess, but the enemies are so slow and infrequent that you can dispatch them with ease, which is done by taking a photo of them. It really feels like an entire system has been tacked on here purely for show. Nothing related to these stats plays any role in the game. There's always the possibility that I've completely missed some crucial aspect that uses all of these mechanics, but if I have, the game certainly doesn't let you know. There's an album you need to fill out alongside your main quest, and by the time I'd finished the game, I had 99% completion on it. If running, jumping, and using the flash gauge mattered, they surely weren't doing a good job of letting me know. Every character I used moved and felt exactly the same. There was so much potential to use the unique nature of each character to tie into the gameplay. How are you going to have Danny not even go ghost here? Even if all of this character stuff did matter, you're not given the opportunity to change characters that frequently, so you'd just be stuck with your choice for extended periods. But let's actually discuss the core gameplay. Each level sees you being dumped into a new world themed around a specific show, with Jimmy giving you 3 objectives alongside a points goal. These objectives center on things like taking photos of characters who aren't from that world, or capturing specific notable moments, like Otto doing sick tricks on the halfpipe. Successfully completing these objectives will net you large chunks of points, so they're usually crucial to you completing the level. Taking photos of out of place characters is the next biggest focus because it'll net you 1000 points every time, except when it doesn't. So many times I'd take a photo of one of these characters and the game just wouldn't do anything. Some of these definitely required me to trigger a special event before it would work, but other times it just seemed like it wasn't working. One of the big aspects of Pokemon Snap is that you have a limited amount of photos, forcing you to be selective with what you capture. Usually the number of photos you have is pretty generous, but the existence of this limit really influences the way you play. In Freeze Frame Frenzy, you have unlimited photos and it kills any sort of nuance or strategy for the gameplay. As soon as the level starts, just spam the capture button because there aren't any consequences. Doing this practically ensures you'll complete every single objective and hit the target score on your first time through. Pokemon Snap also has a system in place to prevent this. Rather than getting points as soon as you take a photo, your photos are scored when your run is finished. Your shots are judged on basic photography techniques as well as whether the subject was performing any notable actions. That kind of system is entirely absent in Freeze Frame Frenzy, which just further emphasizes that spamming photos is the way to go here. It feels like this entire game hasn't been thought through properly. Like, there are plenty of weird and wacky things characters do throughout levels. You could easily make capturing these moments worth more points like Pokemon Snap does, but instead you're just stuck with the same scoring system no matter what.
I saw that! You disgusting pervert! That's absolutely unacceptable!
At the end of each world, you get a boss battle against a robotic version of a character. These always try to have some sort of interesting flavour to them, but it always boils down to the same thing. You take a photo of them once to stun them, then a second time to chip off some health. The formula is so basic that you end up beating them in seconds most times, without ever really trying. Just yet another aspect of Freeze Frame Frenzy with zero depth. One of my biggest issues, alongside the fact that there is no depth here, is that levels are agonisingly slow. There's no way to speed them up, and the glacial pace combined with the unlimited photos means it's brain dead easy. Increasing the speed of levels would have at least raised the odds of you missing crucial photos and maybe even failing a level. I also quickly felt bored of levels because they're all basically the same. You can change what show they're themed to, set it in a jungle or a high school, but at the end of the day, being on the GBA means every level is just a flat 2D plane you scroll through. Even the concept of taking photos in a bathroom like a pervert isn't enough to keep you from falling asleep here. Freeze Frame Frenzy feels like a great example of bringing a genre to handhelds that just doesn't work. I have no idea how you could differentiate these levels enough to make them not feel exactly the same. I guess my one radical idea would have been to remove the on-rails element. Instead, set levels out like a 2D platformer, with the goal still being to take photos, but just in a more unique way. The core gameplay loop of slowly scrolling through levels loses steam really quick. It's an issue I have with both Pokemon Snap games actually. The idea just isn't something I find fun the longer I play it. Freeze Frame Frenzy is a game screaming for some gameplay variation, and they give it to you. They just tack it all onto the end of the game. Impressively, they managed to shoehorn a shmup level into this final stretch. I'm just in awe. At this point, I'd be surprised if a Nick game didn't have a level dedicated to the worst shmup gameplay known to man. Here, the photo snapping has been retrofitted into a space-flying shmup. Asteroids are hurtling towards you and you need to take photos of them to not get hit. Periodically, satellites appear and taking photos of those will pop out a fuel canister. Take a photo of that and you'll progress towards the end of the level. Your progress is tracked at the top and you'll notice that every time you take damage, you're pushed back. This is actually painful. The fact that you lose health when hit is enough of a punishment and provides the game with actual difficulty for the first time ever. But adding in the extra element of you losing progress with each hit just makes it tedious. It was so bad I was almost ready to quit the game, despite being moments from completing the entire thing. They then follow up this shmup section with a few more sections and styles of gameplay not found elsewhere in the game. None of these are ever amazing, but it's the kind of change-up Freeze Frame Frenzy could have used peppered throughout the whole experience, not just shoved into the end. So let's talk about the crossover elements. Now, it's painfully clear that Nick's directive for this game was for Altron to focus on their current slate of shows. The fact that Rugrats is only here in its all grown up form should make that obvious. Playable characters are Timmy Turner, SpongeBob, Otto Rocket, Danny Fenton, Tommy Pickles, Arnold, Jimmy Neutron, and Zim. Although not playable, Wild Thornberrys, My Life as a Teenage Robot, and Tak and the Power of Juju are all featured in the game too. If an early 2004 press release is to be believed, it seems like Tak was planned to be playable too. As a crossover Nicktoons title focused specifically on what was airing in 2004, they've done a pretty great job. As Told by Ginger and Chalk Zone were the only shows not to make an appearance. Considering As Told by Ginger had been cancelled by the time this game released, it makes sense why it doesn't get any representation here. Chalk Zone is really the only notable omission. Naturally, there's heaps of references packed in, and that's pretty cool to see, but the cool factor of this crossover wears off rather quickly. Seeing characters pop up in out-of-place locations is fun, but the novelty wears off fast, especially when it feels like you're seeing the same characters in every damn level. And as I mentioned, the story is very bare bones, meaning character interactions are not really a thing. In fact, it's really only Jimmy and Zim that get lines of dialogue here. Jimmy gets it because he's playing the role of man in the chair, while Zim is revealed to be the mastermind behind the robot bosses. Weirdly though, and I may be remembering this wrong, I don't think the game ever explains why characters from different universes are colliding. Looking at a few plot summaries, it seems like it's just kind of ignored, which is weird. But hey, who needs proper character interactions and story when you've got Jimmy throwing a Fast and Furious style party at the end of the game? A little interesting note is that the game ends on a to-be-continued cliffhanger, implying that there's more to come in this story. This makes me wonder if the unreleased snapshot was supposed to function as a sequel rather than just a home console version of this exact game. Or maybe Altron genuinely planned to make a sequel. I guess Zim's storyline will have to remain unresolved. Visually, Freeze Frame Frenzy is okay. It's nothing great, but it's also not offensively ugly like, say, Attack of the Twonkies. It's just sort of meh, except for some rare moments like Tommy after this boss battle. Or just the fact that Tommy has the wrong coloured hair in this game. And then there's the soundtrack, which certainly exists, I guess, just completely unremarkable, like everything else in this game. It sucks to say it, but Freeze Frame Frenzy just isn't very good. This photography concept is tough to get right in video games. I can only stomach a small amount of Pokemon Snap before I'm well and truly bored of it, so stripping that game of all of its depth and nuance means my interest is going to be reduced even further. Freeze Frame Frenzy just doesn't have anything really going for it, but at the same time it doesn't have these dramatically awful aspects either. Having played it start to finish, I can easily see why it's become so forgotten and overlooked. Despite being a unique crossover game, everything is just so bland. It's not an aggravating experience, just kinda dull, so I'd recommend checking it out for an hour or so, as it's a neat curiosity. But after an hour, you've seen everything it has to offer. Spend any more time with it, and you'll just be bored. Next time, Tak is back. The Staff of Dreams is here, and I'm seriously excited to return to the series. The GBA version of Tak's debut was so much fun, and with Helix back again, I'm interested to see how they try and change things up, and if they improve on the few problems it had. And I feel similar about the home console version. I didn't love Tak's flashy debut, but it did so many key things right that it seems like a polished sequel could easily be a genuinely great game. To make sure you catch that review, hit the subscribe button.